Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We're powered by My Mind MashUps, and we're here again to, well, dive deep into complex topics and pull out what really matters. If you like getting up to speed quickly, definitely remember to like, share, and subscribe, or follow My Mind MashUps wherever you're listening. It honestly helps us a lot to bring you more of these deep dives. Today, wow, we are plunging into a really huge piece of legislation. It's one that could seriously reshape federal policy, across almost every sector. H.R. 1, it's often called the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. Our mission, like always, is to cut through the noise and the spin. We want to distill its main proposals, find those key nuggets of knowledge so you can walk away actually understanding its potential impact without feeling totally overwhelmed.
Yeah, and what's really striking about H.R. 1 is just the sheer scope. It's breathtaking, really. A single bill trying to tackle everything from government spending to environmental rules, national security, even education policy. It's such a clear example of how interconnected all these federal policy areas are. And, that's why understanding the specifics, the details, and those ripple effects is just so crucial for all of us.
That interconnectedness, yeah, that's spot on. Okay, so let's try and unpack this massive thing. Where should we start? Maybe with the foundations. Let's look at fiscal policy and government spending. This bill, it seems to make a pretty bold claim about wanting to cut federal spending significantly.
It does. It proposes rescinding, basically taking back substantial funds from previous laws, like the Inflation Reduction Act, for instance.
Okay.
And it also looks to reduce how much the federal government chips in for administrative costs with states. Plus, it increases various government fees, and importantly, there are provisions in there for raising the debt limit.
Right. So, from the viewpoint of those who wrote it or support it, what's the goal here? What are they hoping this achieves for, say, the average person or the economy overall?
Well, the core argument really revolves around achieving fiscal discipline, as they'd put it. So by taking back funds from things like the Inflation Reduction Act, the aim is to roll back spending they see as excessive or maybe inefficient. They argue this could lead to a leaner federal budget, maybe reduce the national debt over the long haul, potentially stabilize the economy. And those increased government fees, while obviously a cost to someone, are framed as a way to generate more revenue without raising taxes directly, sort of shifting the burden for certain services onto the users, or just making government functions more self-sufficient, perhaps.
Okay, that makes sense from that perspective. But as you said, interconnectedness. Every big policy move causes ripples. So what are the potential downsides, the criticisms we're hearing about these fiscal measures?
Oh, the criticisms are definitely significant, especially regarding those rescinded funds. When you pull money back from programs, particularly, say, environmental initiatives or clean energy projects funded by something like the IRA,
Right.
You could basically stop projects dead in their tracks. Not just slow future progress, but halt things already underway.
Wow.
That impacts innovation, jobs in those sectors, everything.
Okay, so real-world consequences there.
Exactly. And then reducing that federal share for administrative costs. States often have to pick up the slack, or they have to cut services. So programs you might rely on locally, health services, maybe infrastructure maintenance, they could face real budget squeezes. That hits close to home.
Yeah, definitely.
And, the debt limit increase, while it's often necessary to avoid a default, which would be catastrophic,
Right.
critics argue that doing it without fundamentally changing the spending trajectory just sort of enables more debt, kicking the can down the road instead of actually fixing the underlying fiscal issues. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? Do these kinds of broad fiscal moves truly lead to long-term stability, or do they just shift burdens around, creating new problems elsewhere in the economy or for people? It's a really tough balancing act.
It absolutely is. And those effects, like you said, they ripple far beyond D.C. Okay, let's pivot now to an area that always stirs up intense feelings: national security and border control. This bill, it seems to outline some pretty hefty funding increases here.
Yes, substantial. There's a clear focus on boosting military readiness, investing in advanced weapons systems, and also significantly strengthening border security infrastructure.
Like physical barriers.
Physical barriers, yes, but also more personnel and advanced tech surveillance, that kind of thing. And it doesn't stop there. There are also large appropriations earmarked for immigration enforcement and detention facilities.
Okay, so what's the core argument for these measures? Why are they presented as beneficial for the country?
Well, from the viewpoint of national security proponents, the benefits are pretty straightforward. That increased military investment, especially in high-tech weaponry, is about modernizing defense, ensuring the U.S. can project strength, deter potential enemies globally, maintaining that technological edge, essentially.
Right.
And on the border, the argument is pretty direct, too. A more secure perimeter achieved through more barriers, more boots on the ground, better technology like drones and sensors will, they say, significantly cut down on illegal crossings, and also combat drug trafficking, improve overall national safety. The aim is greater control, greater order at the borders.
Okay, that's the security argument. But what about the other side? What are the challenges, the humanitarian concerns that get raised with these kinds of provisions, especially for people trying to enter the country, maybe seeking asylum?
Yeah, that's the crucial counterpoint. The potential humanitarian and logistical challenges are really significant here. That huge funding boost for border enforcement, plus increases in immigration fees that could create major financial and, frankly, systemic barriers for immigrants and asylum seekers.
Making it harder to navigate the legal process.
Exactly. Much harder. Potentially pushing more people into really vulnerable situations or causing long delays for those with legitimate asylum claims. And then, increasing detention capacity and speeding up removals, while the goal might be efficiency. It raises serious questions about whether legal aid resources can possibly keep up, ensuring due process, fair treatment for everyone involved. It could easily strain the system, potentially impacting human rights, leading to overcrowded facilities. It's a complex issue, the very, I think, stark example of that constant tension, balancing national security goals with fundamental humanitarian values. And policy choices often mean prioritizing one over the other, whether intentionally or not.
That balance, yeah, it's critical to grasp. Okay, let's shift gears again to another really contentious area, energy and environmental policy. This part of the bill really seems to lean into deregulation, boosting domestic fossil fuel production.
It absolutely does. It proposes repealing various environmental rules, things like certain EPA emission standards, those govern pollution from power plants, factories, vehicles, and also CAFE standards, the corporate average fuel economy rules, which mandate how fuel-efficient cars and trucks need to be.
Right, I know those.
And beyond repealing rules, it explicitly mandates more oil, gas, and coal lease sales on federal lands. And, very notably, it takes back many of the existing clean energy tax credits that were designed to incentivize renewables.
So what's the big picture argument from proponents? What advantage do they see in these policies, maybe for the economy or energy independence?
Well, the primary arguments you hear are about boosting domestic energy independence and potentially lowering energy costs for consumers. By increasing oil, gas, and coal production here at home, the thinking goes, we become less reliant on foreign sources. That could make the U.S. less vulnerable to, say, global price shocks.
Makes sense.
And those expedited permitting processes, they're meant to cut red tape, get new domestic energy projects online faster, which, proponents argue, could lead to more stable, maybe even lower prices for you at the pump or on your electricity bill, simply by increasing the supply.
Okay, so energy independence, potentially lower costs. But what are the big red flags from an environmental perspective? What are the concerns about climate change with these proposals?
Well, for environmental groups and climate scientists, the concerns are, frankly, profound. Repealing established regulations like EPA emission standards and CAFE standards, while at the same time mandating more fossil fuel extraction on public lands.
Yeah.
That combination could lead to a really significant increase in greenhouse gas emissions, which directly fuels climate change and all its impacts, more extreme weather, sea level rise, all of it.
And what about local pollution?
That too. Rolling back these rules raises serious concerns about increases in air and water pollution, from industrial sites, from more vehicle emissions. That has direct public health consequences, especially for communities living near drilling sites or along busy transportation routes.
Right.
And critically, taking away those clean energy tax credits and funding, that could really slam the brakes on the transition to renewable energy. It could stifle investment, slow down innovation in green tech, right when many argue we need to be accelerating it. This section, maybe more than any other, just throws that tension into sharp relief, doesn't it? The tension between prioritizing immediate economic factors like energy costs and domestic production versus the long-term health of our environment and climate, which ultimately impacts every single one of us.
You can definitely feel that tension playing out.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on. Next up, the bill's potential impact on social programs and healthcare. And the proposed changes here seem pretty sweeping, too.
They really are quite extensive. You're looking at stricter work requirements for SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, what used to be called food stamps, and fewer waivers available, plus changes to who's eligible for SNIK in the first place.
Okay. And for Medicaid?
For Medicaid, yeah. There are proposals for more frequent eligibility checks, what they call redeterminations. Also changes to rules about home equity limits for eligibility, and prohibitions on using Medicaid funds for certain specific procedures or even certain types of healthcare providers.
Wow. And the Affordable Care Act, the ACA.
Significant changes outlined there too, affecting various parts of it, potentially impacting the insurance marketplaces and eligibility rules.
So what's the stated reasoning behind these changes? Are they aiming for, like, efficiency or saving money? What are the intended benefits?
The arguments often center on program integrity and efficiency, yes. For Medicaid, for example, doing more frequent eligibility checks is presented as a way to combat fraud and waste to make sure benefits only go to those who truly qualify, trying to ensure resources are used effectively.
Right.
Similarly, there are measures aimed at pharmacy benefit managers, the PBMs.
The middlemen in drug pricing.
Exactly. The bill aims for more transparency in how they operate. Things like requiring them to disclose the rebates they get from drug makers. The hope is that this could lead to lower drug prices for consumers at the pharmacy counter if those savings are passed on.
Okay, so program integrity, potential cost savings. But what are the potential downsides? What could happen to vulnerable people, those who rely on SNP or Medicaid or the ACA, if these changes actually happen?
Well, that's where the major concerns lie. Those stricter work requirements for SNP, fewer waivers, that could genuinely increase food insecurity, especially for people facing barriers to work. Maybe they have a disability or they're caring for someone or job opportunities just aren't there. It could push more families into hunger.
That's serious.
Very serious. And for Medicaid, changes like new eligibility hurdles those home equity limits. Maybe mandatory copays could effectively block access to essential health care for low-income folks, seniors, people with disabilities. It could mean people delay needed care, which often makes health problems worse and more expensive down the line.
Right.
And similarly, changes to the ACA marketplaces or eligibility could mean fewer people have access to affordable health insurance, which could reverse progress made in reducing the uninsured rate. It really forces us to grapple with a fundamental question, doesn't it? How do we balance the need for program integrity, for responsible spending, with the moral and practical need to provide a safety net, to ensure access to essentials like food and healthcare for people who need help the most? The answers have incredibly real consequences for individuals and families.
A profound question, absolutely,
Yeah.
with very direct human impact. Okay, let's shift focus now to education and student loans. This is another area affecting millions of Americans, shaping opportunities for the future. And this bill seems to propose a major overhaul of federal student aid.
A major overhaul is right. We're talking about some really significant shifts. For example, terminating subsidized loans for undergraduate students.
That's where the government pays the interest while you're in school. Right?
Exactly, that would end. Also, ending PLUS loans for graduate students. Those are the federal loans specifically for grad school or professional programs.
Wow.
It also sets new, potentially lower, limits on how much students can borrow overall. And importantly, it introduces a new repayment plan called the Repayment Assistance Plan.
Yeah.
And there are also some new accountability measures proposed for colleges and universities themselves, plus the introduction of something called workforce Pell Grants.
Okay, quite a bit there. So what are the potential positives? What improvements are proponents hoping for students or borrowers?
Well, on the plus side, that new repayment assistance plan could offer a more structured, maybe more manageable way to repay loans for some people. It might involve payments based on your income, maybe even some principal reduction after you've paid consistently for a certain number of years. That could be a big help for those with large debt loads.
That sounds potentially useful. And the workforce Pell Grants.
Yeah, that's interesting. Unlike traditional Pell Grants, which mostly support four-year degrees, these would specifically fund shorter-term, career-focused training, think certifications, trade skills programs.
Yeah.
The idea is to help people get practical, in-demand skills faster, maybe enter the workforce with less debt than a traditional four-year degree might entail.
Okay, so some potential upsides, but what about the challenges? What are the potential hurdles this could create, especially for students trying to afford college or grad school, or those already dealing with loans?
The challenges look pretty substantial, honestly, particularly for access and affordability. Getting rid of subsidized loans for undergrads means interest starts piling up from day one. That significantly increases the total amount students end up owing.
Right. That makes a big difference.
Huge difference. And ending PLUS loans for grad students, combined with potentially lower overall borrowing limits, that could make it much, much harder for students, especially those from lower income backgrounds, to afford graduate or professional degrees. It could really limit access to advanced education. Plus, potential changes to the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program, that's the one that forgives loans for people in public service jobs after 10 years of payments. Any changes there could really hurt people who chose careers like teaching or social work, counting on that relief.
Yeah, absolutely.
And getting rid of economic hardship deferments, that removes a really crucial safety net for borrowers who hit tough times financially. It could force them into repayment even when they simply can't afford it. So yeah, if you're a student now or thinking about college or grad school or you're managing student debt, these proposed changes could fundamentally change your financial picture, the choices you have. It's a really significant potential shift in federal student aid policy.
A truly massive potential impact, no doubt. Okay, let's wrap up our detailed look with the final big area, tax policy. This bill seems to want to make many parts of the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, the TCJA, permanent. Is that right?
That's a major component, yes. Especially things like the individual income tax rate cuts and the larger standard deduction, which were originally set to expire. This bill would make them permanent.
Okay. And are there new things proposed too?
Yes, several new tax deductions and credits. Things like proposed Trump accounts. These sound like new kinds of tax advantage savings accounts, maybe for education, retirement, perhaps even buying a home. Details might be pending, but that's the concept mentioned.
Interesting.
Also, enhanced tax credits for childcare and deductions related to direct primary care arrangements. And on the business side, some modifications to existing deductions, and interestingly, higher penalties for anyone who improperly discloses taxpayer information.
Okay, so from the supporters' view, who benefits most from these tax changes, and how might they argue it helps the economy?
Well, the broad intention seems to be stimulating the economy, encouraging investment, by providing pretty significant tax relief. Making those TCJA cuts permanent is aimed at letting families, workers, and businesses keep more of their money.
Right.
The argument is that this encourages spending, investment, hiring, and those specific credits, like enhanced childcare credits, are designed to directly help families with those costs, easing financial pressure. The overall goal is fostering a more robust economy by lowering the tax burden.
Makes sense. But what are the potential drawbacks? The criticisms, especially around things like fairness or the national debt.
The main concern you hear from critics is about fairness and inequality. While the changes offer broad relief, making certain TCJA provisions permanent, like the lower corporate tax rate, or changes to the estate tax could disproportionately benefit wealthier individuals and large corporations.
Oh, okay.
So there's a real concern that this could end up widening the economic gap between the rich and everyone else over time. Critics also worry about the long-term impact on government revenue.
Right, does it pay for itself?
Exactly. While the goal is economic growth, making these large tax cuts permanent could lead to much bigger budget deficits down the road, especially if they are matched by spending cuts or other revenue increases. That could add significantly to the national debt. It really comes back to that balancing act again, you know?
Yeah.
Tax policy is always trying to juggle stimulating growth, ensuring some level of fairness, and managing the government's finances. This bill represents a very clear set of priorities in that ongoing debate.
Wow. Okay, that was an incredibly deep dive into the One Big Beautiful Bill Act.
Yeah.
It's just so clear, listening to all that, how this single proposal really does touch almost every single part of federal policy.
Yeah.
From government spending to healthcare, education, the environment, everything. It really shows how interconnected it all is.
It really does. And I think after unpacking all of that, it really prompts a big question for everyone listening. If a bill this broad, this sweeping, actually became law, which part of it do you think would hit closest to home for you? What would have the biggest immediate impact on your daily life? And maybe stepping back even further, which area of federal policy, regardless of the specific bill, do you think most urgently needs this kind of comprehensive attention and potential reform? It's a lot to think about.
It really is. Well, we hope this deep dive has given you a much clearer, maybe a more nuanced understanding of what's actually inside this really significant piece of proposed legislation. Remember, just being well-informed, that's always the crucial first step. If you found this valuable today, please take just a second to like, share, and subscribe or follow My Mind MashUps. It really helps us keep bringing these deep dives to you. You can find My Mind MashUps on Amazon Music, Audible, Facebook, Pocket Casts, Spotify, and YouTube. Until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and stay informed.